Wow, so that was cool. And it leaves us with a ton of questions for us to explore once the game actually comes out. That clam-looking Leviathan was especially cool. I can't wait to learn about all of the new Leviathans that are coming to the game. There's just so much we don't know yet. So let's talk about what we do know. What exactly is a Leviathan? Well, a Leviathan is, and I quote, a vast organism at the top of their respective food chain. Huh, that's weird. The top of their food chains. Does that not imply predation? And we know that the reefbacks are Leviathans too, and they're likely to be the first Leviathan that the player encounters. Even the reefback's PDA entry states that it is in fact a Leviathan class organism, so we may need to redefine exactly what a Leviathan is. A Leviathan is an organism in the Subnautica universe that is at least 20 meters long and has a substantial ecological niche. That specific wording will be brought up later. I've also gone ahead and classified all of the Leviathans that we know about from Subnautica 1 and Subnautica Below Zero, as well as a few from here on Earth, by size into 6 different groups. The first of which being minor Leviathans. These Leviathans are ones that fall between 20 and 30 meters in length. First up, we have the Sea Treader. So I was going to immediately start off on a tangent about how the Sea Treaders are too small to be Leviathans in my opinion, but then I saw a comparison of a Sea Treader standing next to a building, and now I feel bad. So, Sea Treaders are crustacean-like organisms that can be found in the Grand Reef and the Sea Treader's path, traveling in herds. They stand at around 20 meters tall, wide, and long, though most of their size is just their legs. Speaking of their legs, they actually only have 2 legs. Their front leg is actually their long snout that they use to keep themselves balanced. With this snout, they root around in the seabed for flora to eat. The PDA states that the Sea Treader could decimate the local flora of a region, which is why they migrate around. Now to a bit of my speculation, I believe that the Sea Treaders have no natural predators. The reason I believe that they aren't preyed upon by larger Leviathans like the Reapers, which live in the dunes just to the north of the Sea Treader's path, is because their carapace comprises the majority of their body mass, and thus, Sea Treaders are very nutrient poor when it comes to edibility. And while I don't doubt that Reapers travel to the Sea Treader's path for a quick meal in a pinch, there are other more sustainable food sources in the dunes for them to eat. But more on that later. And next is the extinct skeletal remains of the research specimen found in the Disease Research Facility located in the Lost River of the Crater. The preserved skeleton and presumably exoskeleton of this organism is roughly 21 meters long. We know that this organism is very distantly related to the sand shark and the biter, and we can speculate that it was almost certainly predatory based on their sharp teeth alone. The presence of blood kelp also leads us to speculate that perhaps this organism lived in an area with blood kelp in life. And that's really all we know about it. We may be able to infer that it had some resistance to the Carabacterium given its location, but we really have no real way to know anything for certain. And those are actually the only minor Leviathans on 4546b that we know of. Interestingly enough, Earth has several minor Leviathans that we know of too. To rattle off a few, the fin whale, coming in at approximately 25 meters long, Diplodocus, coming in at roughly 26 meters long and 11 meters tall, and the extinct Shonisaurus, which some species were thought to have been upwards of 26 meters long, but my sources were a little confusing, so, do your own research and leave your findings in the comments. I'd love to learn more. And a little bit of a preface for all extinct creatures going forward. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, because my knowledge is limited, and because they're extinct animals, we're learning more about these creatures every day. Like I said, if you know more about these animals and want to share in the comments below, please do. I'd love to hear what you know. The next category are the lesser Leviathans, ranging from 30 to 50 meters long. First up are the glow whales, organisms that are actually way more interesting than they might seem at first glance. They measure up to 30 meters long and can be found in open waters in Sector 0. They open their enormous mouths to consume entire shoals of fish at once, and they're likely preyed upon by larger Leviathans like Colossal. They swim in schools, pods, some secret third thing. Nevertheless, they swim in groups with other glow whales and sing songs, just like earth whales. These songs resonate within the horns on their head and produce chemicals that actually make the glow whales happy. They can also be seen leaping out of the water, just like earth whales, but unlike earth whales, they don't breathe the air, so this behavior is likely just a form of play. Now for a bit of my own speculation, what makes glow whales so interesting to me is that the more you look at them, the more superficial their resemblance to earth whales actually becomes. Their behaviors and size are reminiscent of earth whales, yes, but instead of bony flippers, they have membranous fins, and those horns. They're actually pretty similar to the rabbit ray of the crater when you think about it. Maybe the glow whales of Sector 0 are distantly related to the rays of the crater, much like the stalkers and snow stalkers. Something interesting to think about, and because of that, I would like to declare that yes, the groups that glow whales travel in are named a secret third thing. A fever, which is what a group of Earth rays is called. A fever of glow whales. Next is the chelicerates, more specifically what I have denoted as the common chelicerate. These guys come in at 40 meters long and boast 4 impressive mandibles that make up their beak. They have an armored carapace and can be found in the thermally active areas of Sector 0. They prey upon mid-sized organisms such as cryptosuchuses and are likely specialized for tough-bodied prey items due to their crushing beaks. Chelicerates are likely preyed upon by larger leviathans if anything at all, but it's unclear what those leviathans may be. I'll talk more about my personal theories when I get to their void counterparts. And of course, on Earth, we have several lesser leviathans of our own. Most famously, we have the blue whale, the longest of which has measured in at roughly 31 meters long. And of course, our largest extinct sauropods, such as Argentinosaurus, measuring in at roughly 30 to 35 meters long and standing at between 12 and 20 meters tall, depending on the source. But surprisingly, we have one more lesser leviathan on Earth, the lion's mane jellyfish. While not as massive as the blue whale, their bells are roughly 20 meters wide, but the real size is their length, with some individuals measuring up to 36 meters long. But here on Earth, we actually have one creature that is even larger. And we'll talk about it in our next category, which is the greater leviathan, spanning from 50 to 100 meters in length. First up, and surprisingly the smallest of the greater leviathans on 4546b, is the Reaper Leviathan. Reapers are 55 meters in length, and according to the PDA are almost entirely made of muscle. They have small brains relative to body size, and it is reasonable to assume that they have relatively poor eyesight, as they're found most commonly in the dunes and the crash site, 2 areas with notoriously sediment-rich waters. To make up for this, however, Reapers have a keen sense of echolocation, using their signature roars to see their prey. As the PDA ominously puts it, if you can hear it, the Reaper can see you. Speaking of prey, Reapers are likely ambush predators, as the PDA states that they prefer circling their prey and attacking from behind, likely using the murky waters they call home to their advantage. Virtually anything they can fit into their mandibles is on the menu for the Reapers. Organisms like ampules likely develop their bioelectricity specifically to deter predators like Reapers. But perhaps the most haunting fact about the Reapers is that they aren't even the apex predators of the crater. Following the Reaper is something that may be a bit controversial, but stick with me. We know that the standard small floaters are just less grown versions of the ancient floaters that we see on the floating island and in the underwater islands in the crater. According to my own measurements, these ginormous organisms can reach up to roughly 60 meters in length. They feed on whatever nutrients they can pull from the object that they're attached to, and it's almost certain that once they reach these immense sizes, they have no natural predators. We know that should a floater create a landmass, they will be rewarded with near limitless nutrients and become effectively immortal, living for thousands of years. While they aren't classified as leviathans in the game's PDA, and technically they're 2 organisms living in symbiosis, they do meet the definition that I set, so I felt like I had to include them on this list. If you disagree or have any thoughts of your own, let me know in the comments. Like I said, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Following up these are the Shadow Leviathans, the only Leviathan in Sector 0 to actually frighten me during both my initial playthrough and my second playthrough that I did recently. These Leviathans measure in at 60 meters long, slinking their ribbon-like bodies through the crystal caverns of Sector 0. They likely have no natural predators given their native habitat, and likely feed on anything that can be trapped in its jaws. We know that they don't chew, or even bite their food. Rather, they douse it in a bright blue type of acid, which likely helps break down food externally, while the cage of teeth holds their prey in place. Next is the follow-up on the common chelicerate from earlier. It's the void chelicerate. Measuring in at 65 meters in length, these guys inhabit the ecological dead zone surrounding Sector 0. As far as we know, their behavior is similar to the common chelicerate, only the void varieties travel in groups of up to 3. I have a lot of speculation when it comes to the chelicerates as a whole, and it ties into other information we know about other leviathans, namely the ghost leviathan and the sea emperor, which obviously we'll talk about later. My personal school of thought is this. We know that the crater is where ghost leviathans go to breed, and that is likely part of why the biodiversity there is so high. I believe that the void chelicerate is the adult form of the common chelicerate, and that they come to Sector 0 to breed. The juveniles are likely highly competitive and thus don't travel in groups like the adults. I will expand on this theory a little more when we talk about other larger leviathans. All of this is to say, though, that I believe that the void chelicerate prey upon other unknown leviathans in the void, and may be preyed upon by larger unknown leviathans. Following up on a whole lot of speculation is an organism that we know a lot about, the reefback leviathan. Measuring in at 70 meters long, these gentle giants can be found in most areas with open waters in the crater, living in groups with other reefbacks. They eat plankton-like organisms and largely keep to themselves. They have no natural predators as adults, but are likely preyed upon by various other creatures at various stages of their lives. Reefbacks emit booming calls when other reefbacks are nearby, likely as a form of communication. The PDA states that they may even have a low level of sentience. Most notably, reefbacks host microbiomes on their thick-layered exoskeletons that likely grow and develop over the course of the reefback's multiple century-long life. Reefbacks likely breathe and eat with the same siphon-like orifices on their undersides, and we know that the glowing pods on their underside are linked to their digestive tracts. Reefbacks are also unique in the sense that most life we see on 4546b are vertebrates, or at least they possess structures analogous to spines. Reefbacks, however, do not seem to have these structures. The apparent lack of physical eyes leads me to speculate that the reefbacks may lack a sense of sight, instead relying on their other senses to perceive the world around them. Up next is the iceworm. Iceworms are native to the glaciers in Sector 0. Coming in at a whopping 95 meters long, they are the longest known greater leviathans. They are also opportunist predators that eat just about anything they can find. We can speculate that they're likely cannibalistic as we find the partial carcass of an iceworm in Sector 0. They use their large horns, which are filled with alkaline metals that react violently with the frozen water that they burrow through, as a 1,000-degree knife to slice through the ice. We know from the architect Alan that the iceworms existed while the architects were alive, meaning that along with the sea dragons, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, the iceworms have been in this particular area for at least 1,000 years, which isn't actually all that impressive, all things considered, but I figured I'd mention it. One additional thing to note is that in some artwork for Subnautica Below Zero, the iceworms can be seen in the water, though this never happens in game. Make of that what you like to. I personally believe that there's no reason other than gameplay that iceworms shouldn't be able to swim should they desire to. Or if you want to argue in the other direction, perhaps their reactive horns on their head would explode or something when they come into contact with that much liquid water. Either could be argued for, so pick your poison. Next is the extinct organism known only as the Ancient Skeleton. The remains of this creature are found within the Lost River of the crater, and it is unknown whether or not we have a complete specimen. The remains that we do have measure at roughly 85 meters in length, and based on the huge sharp teeth, we can infer that this organism was almost certainly a carnivore in life. It is unknown whether or not this specimen would have had any predators, or what type of habitat it would have inhabited. We know that this specimen is over 1 million years old, and was long extinct by the time the architects found its remains. We can see that there are several architect machines surrounding the specimen, the purpose of which is speculated to be some sort of scanner or probe. And that is all of the greater leviathans on 4546b. However, there are some animals native to Earth that I would like to discuss. First is the giant siphonophore. Large, deep-sea, colonial organisms that can reach up to 50 meters in length. I am hesitant to put them on this list because of their colonial nature, as well as the fact that they are rarely wider than the handle of a broomstick, but I did still want to mention them. Additionally, I feel like because they are disqualified for being colonial organisms, a case can be made for floaters not being counted. However, as far as we know, floaters are only 2 organisms in symbiosis, meaning that each organism then would be counted as its own leviathan, as they are still so large. Now would also be a good time to mention that the large giant coral tubes that are a part of the generated terrain in the shallows are roughly 80 meters long, but I'm not counting them for 2 reasons. 1, corals are colonial on Earth, and 2, we don't know if what we call corals on 4546b are even fauna, as they're categorized under their own tab separate from flora and fauna in the PDA. If colonial organisms can count and the corals on 4546b are even considered to be fauna, then we have an extra leviathan here on Earth, and also the Safe Shallows has the 4th largest leviathan in the game, so yeah. Anyways, the other animal on Earth is the bootlace worm. There has been one bootlace worm that has measured up to 55 meters long, and several that have been 30 meters long. I'm hesitant to add them because they don't really have any particularly prominent niche, as per my definition, as they are often preyed upon by normal fish and seabirds, and really don't eat anything out of the ordinary. They're just really long. So with the definition being completely made up by me, feel free to classify the bootlace worm as a leviathan if you like, just like the other 2. That wraps up greater leviathans, and now we're in the home stretch. Next up are the grand leviathans, which measure in at 100 to 150 meters in length. The smallest grand leviathan that we know of is the ghost leviathan. Coming in at 110 meters long when fully grown, they natively inhabit the ecological dead zone on 4546b. though will travel to the crater to reproduce. As adults, they feed on microscopic lifeforms and require a large amount of territory in order to meet their caloric needs. As juveniles, however, they are apex predators in the waters that they inhabit, such as the Lost River, and as they grow older, the Grand Reef and Northern Blood Kelp Zone. They are extremely territorial by nature, their large hammerheads likely evolving specifically as a weapon, much like Earth bovines. Ghost Leviathans travel from the void to the Lost River of the crater in order to lay their eggs. The only instance in-game of Ghost Leviathan eggs is in the Tree Cove. There, we can see a massive tree growing around several large eggs. Scanning the tree reveals that the eggs were likely laid when the tree was small, and the tree has since grown around the eggs. The eggs are also ginormous, much too large for a Ghost Leviathan to lay, so we can infer that the eggs grow substantially before they hatch. We can then infer that either these eggs are unfertilized or have an extremely long gestation period. If you subscribe to my Colossal theory from earlier, Ghost Leviathans are potentially preyed upon by unknown Leviathans in the void. Personally, I believe that an adult Ghost Leviathan would make an excellent meal for a pack of void Colossals. They have soft bodies that could easily be torn by the beaks of the Colossals, and likewise, the Colossals have hard shells that may be more resistant to the ramming attacks of a Ghost Leviathan, but of course, that is just my own personal theory. Up next is the Vent Garden. They are 110 meters tall, and by my rough measurements, about 80 meters wide at their widest. They are by far the largest Leviathan in Sector 0, being large enough to host their own microbiome inside of their bells. The vent gardens feed on microscopic lifeforms that spew from the hydrothermal vents that they anchor themselves above in the tree spire zone of Sector 0. Young vent gardens typically swim in groups nearby the adults. This may be a sort of defense mechanism against the colossals that stalk the nearby waters. The reason young vent gardens swim is actually to strengthen their tentacles in preparation to find a hydrothermal vent to anchor themselves above. Once anchored above a hydrothermal vent, latent stem cells will activate in the young vent gardens, which will develop into the opening that allows their primary food source to flow into their bells. And the final grand leviathan that we know of is the sea dragon. These enormous leviathans measure in at 112 meters long. They inhabit the incredibly deep subterranean lava zones of the crater and will rarely venture out in order to hunt their favorite prey, Reaper Leviathans. Due to their immense size, sea dragons likely have an incredibly low metabolism, allowing them to only surface once every few years to hunt. We know that sea dragons are incredibly long-lived and also have an incredibly low population, the PDA suggesting that their population may be in the single digits. However, we know from the Sea Emperor and the Ghost Leviathan that eggs that are laid can remain dormant for centuries before hatching. Perhaps the sea dragons are so large that their ecosystem can only support an incredibly small population, and when one dies, a clutch of eggs hatch, maintaining a stable, albeit small population. Their closest living relative that we know of is the Sea Emperor, which we will discuss shortly. Interestingly, the sea dragons have a completely different niche than the Sea Emperors, being apex macro carnivores with zero natural predators, living the majority of their incredibly long lives underground. Sea dragons have developed the habit of swallowing molten lava and then expelling it from their mouths later. The reason for this is unclear, as it is unlikely that this is a defense mechanism due to the sea dragon's lack of predators. We might theorize that this is for interspecies competition. However, this seems unlikely to me, as a species with such low natural population probably wouldn't want to engage in interspecies competition. This behavior could also be a leftover trait from when there were large threats that the sea dragon had to fight off, as we know that these leviathans existed alongside the architects and almost certainly long before that, as the PDA states that the sea dragon is likely one of the oldest organisms on the planet. Another curiosity with the sea dragons is that their bodies seem to be 1/3 inorganic matter. The PDA suggests that this may be a result of consuming molten lava, and it may be what allows these leviathans to live in such extreme environments. And that does it for the grand leviathans that we know of. We have no evidence of any creatures on Earth that have grown to be this large, as it is likely impossible due to the laws of physics. I won't go too deep into it because I don't fully understand it myself, and I want to try my hardest not to spread misinformation. We can speculate, however, on how the creatures on 4546b got to be so large. Some reasons may be that the life on 4546b is simply made of material stronger than our calcium-based bones, or that there's more dissolved oxygen in the water, and we know almost for certain that some of the larger organisms have much slower metabolisms. It's likely not any one thing, but rather a bunch of things that come together to make the life on 4546b so unique. You may have also noticed that I have been very careful not to call any of the creatures on 4546b animals. As far as we know, these organisms have zero biological relationship to anything we have on Earth, having evolved millions of light years away from Earth. And because we can't scan the microscopic life forms that lots of the Leviathans eat, like the Sea Emperor, the Ghost, and the Vent Garden, we can't definitively say whether or not they are predatory. That's why I excluded predation from my definition, as we know for a fact that at least sea treaders eat flora. We know that the reefbacks eat plankton-like life forms, but that is so incredibly vague because we have a million different types of plankton here on Earth, so it's difficult to say what exactly any of these organisms eat. All of that is to say that we have a very limited understanding of what life on 4546b is made of and how it's possible that they look and act the way that they do. Anyways, now we move on to the Colossal Leviathans. These enormous creatures span from 150 to 200 meters long. I cannot stress how extremely large this is. For the Americans watching, that's 656 feet and 2 inches, nearly 2 football fields, or for the non-Americans, more than twice the height of the tower that holds Big Ben. Freaking enormous. I just wanted to stress how large these creatures are. The games do not do the true scale of things justice. If you have access to it, I highly recommend playing Subnautica in VR mode to get a true sense of scale. Coming from someone with no natural fear of the ocean, I was too scared to play survival. I was screen sharing with one of my friends and had to switch to a creative save so that we could actually explore. Anyways, tangent aside, let's take a look at the largest creatures known in the Subnautica universe. I'm going to do this slightly out of order because I want to save the most interesting Leviathans for last. So first up is the frozen Leviathan from Sector 0. This extinct Leviathan is roughly 150 meters long, and only one specimen is known of. This creature likely went extinct within the past 1,000 years, as the specimen we can see is infected with Kara. We also know, according to Alan, that in life, the frozen Leviathan was aggressive. Based on the teeth, we can infer that this creature may have been piscivorous, meaning that it preyed upon 4546b's fish-like creatures, which I guess is sort of a given. We really don't know what may or may not have preyed upon this organism, and in terms of habitat, we can assume that it primarily lived on the glaciers, only swimming to hunt, as its limbs suggest it was mostly adapted for life on land. And that's all we really know about the frozen Leviathan. Now to perhaps my favorite Leviathan in all of the Subnautica franchise, so far at least. We'll see what comes in Subnautica 2. The Sea Emperor. The largest living creature in all of the Subnautica universe that we know of, the Sea Emperor measures in at 200 meters long. When they were more widespread, the PDA suggests that they likely swam in herds along the planet's deep ocean trenches, only coming up to the surface to consume large amounts of microscopic life. The PDA suggests that egg-laying may be a once-in-a-lifetime event. I personally believe that the Sea Emperors came to the crater specifically to lay their eggs, as the enzyme required for hatching are made exclusively of materials that are found in the crater, and the PDA suggests that the Sea Emperors had a preferential environment for egg-laying. The extremely concentrated biodiversity of the crater may be a direct result of not one, but 2 large Leviathans using it as their nesting sites. But that is only my speculation. What we do know, however, is that the PDA states that once young Sea Emperors grew large enough, they would split off from their herd to form their own. The most plot-crucial trait of the Sea Emperor is the ability to produce and secrete enzyme 42, the cure for the devastating Kara bacterium. Enzyme 42 is produced in the digestive tract of the Sea Emperors and is occasionally expelled into the water, and enzyme 42 is Sea Emperor poop. It's poop. It isn't explicitly stated, but it's totally poop, right? Remember the cutscene where Riley smears it all over his hand? Oh my god. In infant Sea Emperors, enzyme 42 is extremely concentrated. Also, they spit it out of their mouths, which may imply that the babies are so full of it that they have to regurgitate it after being born. My absolute favorite trait of the Sea Emperor is that they are sapient, not just sentient, sapient. If you don't know the difference, sentience is the ability to feel, perceive, or experience the environment, and sapience is the capacity for high-level intelligence, logic, wisdom, and self-awareness. The Sea Emperor is able to meaningfully communicate with the player and is philosophical and is likely even religious. They understand the natural environment, such as the functions of currents in the distribution of life. I'll just play the clip I'm referring to.
Perhaps next we meet, I will be an ocean current, carrying seas to a new land, or a creature so small It sees the gaps between the grains of sand.
Interestingly, we don't know if humans are able to communicate back to the Sea Emperors, as we never hear Riley do so in the game, and I imagine that it's difficult to communicate underwater when your primary method of communication involves expelling air out of your lungs. Similarly, we know that the Sea Emperor was unable to communicate with the architects. My thought is because that the architects were so interlinked with technology that they were unable to receive the telepathic messages from the Sea Emperor, or maybe the brains of their vessels are not biological. Either way, I don't really know enough about telepathy to speak on this subject. Ask like the X-Men or something. I don't know. But that is the last of the Colossal Leviathans, leaving only one category remaining: the Gargantuan Leviathans, measuring in at 250 meters and larger. Now, we only have one known specimen, and that is the Gargantuan fossil found within the lost river of the crater. We know that the Gargantuan fossil is roughly 3 million years old and was approximately 1,100 to 1,300 meters long and was eel-like in body plan. The PDA suggests that the specimen would have been too large to enter the Lost River naturally, and the cavern likely formed around the fossil. We have no indication of what kind of environment this Leviathan would have inhabited in life. Based on dentition alone, we can infer that this Leviathan would have been carnivorous, but what it preyed on is unknown. And those are all of the Leviathans in Subnautica 1 and Subnautica Below Zero. I tried to avoid any sort of influence from the fandom when writing this, so if I missed anything that seemed obvious to you, that's probably why. My greatest source was the Subnautica wiki and the game PDA entries. I tried to make it clear when I was hypothesizing or theorizing on certain things. I really have never done a video like this, so I would appreciate any feedback you may have. Also, I have a Discord server linked in the description if you feel like joining. It's just me and a few of my friends right now, but we may or may not have some fun things planned for later down the line. Let me know what you're most excited for about in Subnautica 2. Personally, it's the creatures and environments. Also, while I was writing this, I thought it could be fun to do a follow-up video about the architects or about other aspects of Subnautica lore. If you want that, let me know. Anyways, if you like the video, that's great. If not, go watch something else. I'll see you later.